Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Compass Points, the weekly podcast brought to you by the fine folks behind CompassKnox.com. And the fine folks behind CompassKnox.com are me, Jesse Mayshark, and my friend and cohort, Scott Barker. How you doing, Scott?
Doing great, Jesse. How are you?
I'm good. We're recording this on Friday afternoon, before the start of a long weekend. Do you have any big weekend plans?
Rest.
Yeah.
That is it.
That's usually our weekend plan, I feel like. But maybe we get a little bit more rest this weekend.
Yes. One night of more than 4 or 5 hours sleep extra would be nice.
That would be good. All right. Well, this week, even though it was the week leading into a holiday weekend, which often can be sort of quiet on the civic front, we actually had some interesting things happen and wrote about most of these at CompassKnox.com, which if you are a subscriber, you can go and read. And if you're not a subscriber, you can go to CompassKnox.com and find out how to become one. But for now, we'll talk about them right here. Scott, a couple interesting stories out of the world of higher education this week.
Yes, very much so. The Tennessee Higher Education Commission came out with a study on Monday that showed that while 2/3 of Tennessee high school graduates wanted to go to college, only about half actually turned around and went the next fall. And that's a percentage that's kind of disturbing to higher education leaders. It's an accelerating trend.
It's actually dropped the last couple of years.
It has
right?
dropped since 2015. In 2015, the 2/3 of the high school graduates in Tennessee went to college the fall after they graduated, and so now it's down to half essentially, and
that's by college we mean any kind of post-secondary. Trade schools or
yes, it can be trade schools, it can be community colleges. In fact, community colleges were the ones hardest hit. Enrollment is down at community colleges across the state, and so there are several other interesting tidbits that came out of that. Of course, racial disparities are still great. Many more white graduates go than African Americans or Hispanics. Also, the one thing is there's a gender disparity, but unlike most gender disparities in our culture, more women are going straight from high school into college than men, and that's a concern for
and I
some
know
of these educators.
That's true
as well.
across the country, right?
Yeah.
Seeing most institutions of higher learning are seeing majority female populations.
Yeah, and these are trends that aren't unique to Tennessee. These are this is something that mirrors what's going on in the rest of the country. Here in Knox County, the percentage of graduates who went on to higher education immediately was higher. It was about 59%. So there's a little bit of optimism there, and there were differences. Some of the rural counties, only a quarter of their graduates went on to college or trade school, and so they were. in response to this, the University of Tennessee's Baker Center held a symposium, I guess you would call it, a get-together with former Governor Bill Haslam and other education leaders from across the state to talk about what could be done about it. Nothing definitive came out of that. There was a lot of discussion about things that were being done. One thing is Anthony Wise, the president of Pellissippi State, mentioned that Pellissippi State's 20% smaller enrollment-wise than it was just a couple of years ago. And
they had seen a big increase when Tennessee Promise was first introduced.
Right. The figure I gave earlier about the high mark of enrollment from 2015 was the year that Tennessee Promise was started.
And Tennessee Promise basically provides free tuition at community colleges and trade schools if people maintain certain grade averages and so forth.
Absolutely. And so it's a great equalizer for Tennessee students, especially lower income students. But it's not had the lasting effect that they thought it would have. And so one of the things that Anthony Wise talked about was the needs of students who are going to community colleges, that they still, tuition and room and, tuition is fine, but they need to have more money to do other things, to live. He said that they even opened an office, a resource office for students, because there are students who are homeless. There are students who can't afford daycare, who have children and can't afford daycare, and there's talk of establishing food pantries because of hunger. So it's not
more of a holistic approach.
They're starting to look at that as a more holistic approach, and there's some other approaches that these leaders talked about. Most of the people in the room were college and university administrators and faculty. A lot of the discussion wound up being about, well, what can we do once they're here, rather than actually getting them into that pipeline. But and of course, COVID-19 had an effect. One of the things that one of the Higher Education Commission people talked about was that there are students who were averse to learning remotely. And there are also students who were averse to learning in person because of concerns about COVID. And when schools were going back and forth, they just kind of threw up their hands and didn't go.
Right. They kind of lost.
I mean, essentially, that's what they said. Yeah,
both of those kinds of students, basically.
Now, there's another higher education story that happened during the week. We had heard about this, was working on it, and then found out that the faculty at UT were a little upset. But the University of Tennessee is looking at restructuring its college structure. Now, the university is divided into 11 colleges of various areas of expertise.
The business school,
there's
the
a business
engineering
school, engineering school, and then there's the College of Arts and Sciences, which is by far the largest of the colleges, about 7,000, more than 7,000 undergraduates, more than 700 faculty members. And the departments that are within that college run everything, from French and history and sociology to the fine arts, sculpture, things like theater, and then to the hard sciences like biology, chemistry, and physics. So the proposal, or at least it's a balloon that's being raised more than a formal proposal that's been made, is to divide the college into 3 sections: a natural sciences, one that focuses on the humanities, and another that focuses on fine arts. The faculty in the College of Arts and Sciences is up in arms about it. They've written a letter to Chancellor Plowman saying, you need to hold off on doing this. We want to go through a process before we look at it. So that would have really, most of the impact would be, of course, on the university. And so one of the things that would happen is that you would have to have 2 more deans, several more associate deans, several more directors below them. So there's would really increase the administrative costs quite a bit, and that's one issue that the faculty have raised. There are interdisciplinary programs that could be affected by that. There are a lot of unknowns. The administration has said, well, this is just one of the things we're thinking about, and that they are still in the process of gathering information and sharing information about before they actually make a decision. And
Sure.
so
Although we know how these things tend to go. They move from being something we're just thinking about to then a solid proposal to then something that gets adopted. And that can happen relatively quickly, I think, is what the faculty is probably responding to.
Yeah, it can happen relatively quickly. As far as the timing goes, there are a couple of things. The faculty is very concerned that this is kind of bubbling up in the summer. And a lot of faculty members travel. They travel for research, and they're not on campus. Those that are have an on-campus presence. Generally, it's not as frequent, is not as full-time as it is during the regular academic year. So they're concerned about that. They're thinking that is a kind of a way to slide this idea through, before or without getting the input from a greater number of faculty members. But the other thing is the budget for next. This isn't going to happen in the fall.
Right.
The budget for the next academic year has already been passed, or not. It's already been passed at the campus level.
Right.
The board of trustees.
It'll be approved in June.
The board of trustees will rubber stamp it in June, and so nothing's going to happen in the next fiscal year. But we're also talking about academia, where change a lot of times they're used to change over a longer period of time than 1 year.
Right. Yeah.
And so you've got a lot of factors involved.
And it seems like the concern from a lot of the faculty is that by dividing it that way, some of the disciplines contained within the College of Arts and Sciences, and probably especially the natural sciences part, would be given more priority and more funding than the humanities and the fine arts, which don't generate the same kinds of research funding and grant dollars and certain kinds of metrics that universities like to look for.
Yes. And one thing about the budget that went through, they also have adopted a new budgeting process where a lot of how the funds go depends on the amount of floor space you have, square footage that you have in the facilities that you use. Well, the natural sciences use a lot more square footage than the humanities, for example.
Right.
Labs are bigger than classrooms, and some labs are huge. So there's that. And one faculty member I talked to brought up naming rights, because said it would be very difficult for the school to come up with $150 million to name its biggest college after a donor. Donors, $150 million is a lot of money for any donor, but coming up with $50 million from 3 different donors to have a college named after them is a lot more doable. So I don't know how much that plays into it. But there are reasons, financial reasons that faculty members are concerned about.
All right. Well, we will continue to watch that. I'm sure we'll continue to hear about it from faculty members and others.
Yep.
This past week at County Commission, there was a fairly significant vote on a controversial zoning issue down in South Knox County, and this is something that The local communities in the Dry Hollow area had been organized and agitated about for really much of the past year, trying to either stop or reduce the scope of a proposed housing development right there. And this is kind of off of, it's not on Chapman Highway, but off of Chapman Highway on Sevierville Pike, down by sort of like the Bauer ball fields, really almost to the southern edge of the county there. And the net result of all of this was that County Commission did, after several months of postponing this decision, and a cynic might suggest that they postponed the decision to get past the early May primaries, but regardless, they approved it, and they approved it in a way that allows about the same total amount of houses, potentially 200 and almost 260 houses on this 159-acre site that the Planning Commission recommended. But the key part of this is really that there's a flat part of this property and there's a hilly part of the property. The flat part is by far the most developable because it has utilities, it has water and sewer hookups. The hilly part does not have water and sewer hookups, and it's also on a hillside. Those are just inherently more expensive and difficult to develop. And what County Commission did was approve 180 houses, up to 180 houses on the flat part. The original recommendation from Planning Commission would have allowed all 255 houses to be built on the flat part. Under the way it's been approved now, the developer can build 180 houses on the flat part. They can also build another 77 on the hillside, but nobody expects that to happen soon, if ever, because the flat area was clearly really what everybody was concerned about. So the community groups weren't thrilled with the outcome. They had suggested that more like 145 total units would be acceptable in that area because they're concerned about those narrow roads. You have Sevierville Pike and Dry Hollow Pike and Bays Mountain Road that aren't really designed to handle this kind of traffic. But they still felt like it was a better result, that they, by being active and engaged, they were able to bring that density down, at least on the flat part. And it was just another interesting example of what we see over and over and over again is this tension between a push for growth, a push for development, a push for more housing. We've heard a lot of talk in recent months about how we need more housing in the county. But then every place you put that, it's going to affect somebody, even in very rural areas. Like this is a very rural area. And I think it's just one more example of the kinds of arguments and fights that we're going to keep having. We do have coming up in our interview segment in a couple of minutes a talk with Kevin Murphy of the Knox County Planning Alliance, talking about kind of the big picture of planning in the county and some of the things that that organization would like to see. So we'll get to that in a minute. Also wanted to talk very quickly about you had an update this past week on Knoxville Utilities Board's rollout of its internet offering. How's that going?
Yeah, talked to the folks at KUB about their broadband project. They're going to expand their fiber optic network throughout their electric service footprint and offer internet broadband services to compete with companies like AT&T and Comcast and all. And they have just started. There are 3 areas within the city of Knoxville that will receive the option to sign up for the services first. They are there's most of East Knoxville, a section of North Knoxville, and Fountain City. You kind of slip over Sharps Ridge there a little bit, and then the Cumberland Estates area of northwest Knoxville. So those will begin rolling out. I think the East Knoxville area will be the first to go live, and that will be in September. Then by the end of the year, all 3 will be about 25,000 residents who will be, or households who will be eligible to sign up. And so so far, there are no big glitches that they've talked about, but it is moving forward. Now, one of the interesting things is Comcast and AT&T and any other provider they're not just sitting back. they're they're responding as anyone as you would think they would to a challenge in the marketplace. And as Comcast, for one, a day or two after our story ran, I don't think there was a connection, but they did announce an expansion of what they do downtown to bring more high-speed internet to the downtown area.
Which has been a big problem. A lot of downtown has not been
Yes.
served by anybody, including Comcast. AT&T has had some availability, but Comcast has not been down there.
Right. So it's it's been, of all places, you think downtown is going to be at the cutting edge, and it's really actually lagging behind a lot of places. But Comcast is going to invest in downtown and in other areas. They also talked about serving underserved communities. There are all kinds of they were talking about using a federal program to help low-income households have internet access. KUB is using the same program, but as well. So it's not going to, Comcast is not going to, and AT&T will not just slink away in the night because KUB's involved. It's going to be an interesting business tussle over the next few years. KUB's rollout does take 7 years, so they're not going to be fully competitive.
Comcast and AT&T have a lot of time to try to figure out how they're going to compete and all these. But I do think it's really interesting because Comcast and AT&T, but all of the internet providers tried to stop KUB from they lobbied in various ways to prevent KUB from offering internet. And they kind of made the argument that you've heard in a lot of parts of the country from the private sector when you get either government or utilities involved in offering internet, saying, well, this is the government interfering with businesses. But the reality is, as many people who live in Knoxville and Knox County know, there are many parts of Knoxville and Knox County that have no competition for internet service, or no good competition. You might have like Comcast, and then maybe you could pay to get some level of service, but nothing is good. And so what actually seems to be happening, which, as you say, is what you would expect, is that when you have another player enter the market, it doesn't actually matter that player is a public or private player. It's another player in the market. Right. It creates competition, and what happens when you get competition is that people compete. Yeah. And suddenly companies that a year ago were saying, well, we can't offer service downtown because it just doesn't work for our numbers or whatever. Suddenly they find a way to make things available that weren't available before. This is exactly what people who believe in market theory will tell you, that a well-functioning marketplace with competition will lead to more and better options for people. That appears to be what we're getting because of KUB now getting into the pool here.
Oh, absolutely. Now, of course, KUB being a utility is a little different from city government or county government getting involved. But because all their revenues basically come from ratepayers, so it does function more like a business. But there are certain inherent advantages they have over other private businesses. But it is kind of interesting that we've gone from, or we're transitioning from an area that basically has a couple of monopolies here and there to one of more robust competition. And it will be interesting to see how they respond. How KB hasn't even started marketing this yet, really. They're going to be starting that this summer, and most of it will be focused on the areas where it's available. They don't want to do a whole lot of marketing in far east Knox County, where they can't get it and won't be able to get it for a while. It'll be interesting to see how they market it, how they respond to when Comcast and AT&T make changes, how they respond to those, to see if they're nimble enough they've got a pretty strong opening gambit, but if they're nimble enough to to actually survive and adjust to changing conditions in the marketplace.
Right now, they're doing the infrastructure part of it, which we know KUB can do. We know KUB can get out there and they can, run lines and do all of that. But they're going to be getting into a new business that they've never been in before. So it'll be interesting to watch. And I live in phase 2, and so I will keep you posted on what kind of mailers I get from KUB, what kind of rollout they do. I'm very curious to see. So now we are going to go to our weekly interview. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an interview with Kevin Murphy of the Knox County Planning Alliance. He's a longtime advocate for planning and especially rural preservation in East Knox County. And we'll kind of talk about his family history there. And one thing I want to mention, Kevin is a smart guy and had a lot of interesting things to say. And so we had a fairly long conversation. So in the podcast episode, we're only going to have the first part of that conversation, which is talking about sort of some big picture issues around planning and the advanced Knox process and the Knox County Planning Alliance. The full version of the conversation gets into some more specifics, including talking about that vote on the South Knoxville property and also some proposals about changes to the authority of the County Board of Zoning Appeals. You'll be able to hear the full conversation in a special bonus section of the podcast that will be separately available in all of the same places that the podcast is available very shortly after this episode airs. So make sure you check for that as well. And let's check in with Kevin. Okay, joining us this week to talk about planning issues and other important things is our guest Kevin Murphy, who is a longtime advocate for planning and rural preservation, particularly in East Knox County, where he has a long family history, which we'll touch on. Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jesse and Scott, for having me this morning. I really am looking forward to this conversation.
So you are a co-founder of the Knox County Planning Alliance, which I'm going to ask you about in just a second. But also at this week's County Commission meeting, you were actually honored, or I guess your family's farm was honored by commission. That's Murphy Springs Farm, which I think goes back to the 1700s. Is that right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my great grandparents, Robert and Martha Murphy, migrated from Southwest Virginia into Knox County, and we don't have any records that tell us anything before their very first deed of property on the farm. And that was May 24th, 1797. They bought 110 acres from William Anderson, who's the father of Isaac Anderson, founder of Maryville College. They bought it from John Crawford. He was actually one of the Knox County delegates to the Tennessee Constitutional Convention of 1796. So just about a year after Tennessee achieved statehood. And we've been here. The family's been on the farm since 1797. One of their sons built a house around 1835 to 1840, and that's the house that I'm doing this interview from today.
Wow, that's great. And County Commission was there a special designation that they were giving to the farm?
It was really just an honor that it has been here 225 years. It is the third oldest farm in the county. The other two oldest farms are the McBee Farm, which is out farther on Washington Pike, settled in 1785, and the Strong Stock Farm, which I believe was settled around 1791. Both of those are in East/Northeast Knox County. And ask Commissioner Beeler if he wanted to take a minute just to recognize the long history of some of the farms and families in the county, and he decided to do so. I think there's we have a Century Farm designation. I believe there's now 13, maybe 14 farms in the county that are designated Century Farms by the Department of Agriculture, and that's a designation to simply say that a family's been farming there for at least 100 years. So it's a nice documentation and recognition that of what some of the old farms are, the older families in the state, and really it, I think, serves as kind of a touchstone to remind us of our agricultural heritage that still continues today.
and very relevant to what we're talking about today, because a lot of what we talk about when we talk about planning and development in Knox County, especially outside the city, is this sort of ongoing conversion of a lot of our traditional agricultural property into residential or commercial development. So tell us about the Knox County Planning Alliance. This was something that you and some other sort of community and preservation advocates across the county put together a couple of years ago.
Yep, it started at a county commission meeting. There were individuals from the Hardin Valley area, the South Knox area, the Northeast Knox area, and East Knox County there for different issues. And we heard each other get up and speak. And in the back of the commission room, we started, just talking, and we said, "Oh, we're all from different parts of the county, but we have very similar concerns and issues and challenges that we're dealing with." So we formed informally. We have an informal board of advisors, and we had, I don't know if it was a vote, but somebody, they asked me to be the chair of it. So I'm one of I'm the primary chair of the group, and really we're a coalition of some involved citizens, and some of the citizens represent community groups, and we advocate for improved and effective planning in the county, particularly around the growth concerns. And the main things that KCPA is looking for is really to make our planning processes thoughtful. We want them to be simpler for everybody to understand, and we think that benefits applicants, developers, neighborhoods, engineers. Simpler regulation that's a little bit more clear cut and prescriptive. And one of the main things that we are also that we look at is we really want to understand the cumulative impact of development. So not just case by case, but what does the 20 cases or 30 cases, in that area, what does that actually do? So that's a lot of of why we formed.
We should probably mention that one of your fellow co-founders, Kim Frazier, is currently a candidate for county commission in the 11th district. She won the Republican primary there. I won't ask you who you're supporting in that race, but I know that she is talking about a lot of these same issues in her campaign for commission. And I know that one of the issues that you all are very engaged with now is the advanced Knox process, which is an update of the county's comprehensive planning. Can you talk about that a little bit? Where it's at, what are the opportunities for public involvement and input?
Yep. So advanced Knox is, and it relates to unincorporated Knox County. There is all counties and municipalities in the state are supposed to have a comprehensive land use plan. And today the city and county share one, the Knox County General Plan, which was finalized in 2003. And that contains a lot of sector plans underneath it. But at the highest level of that general plan, it hasn't been updated since 2003. It has sector plans and park plans and hillside ridgetop plan and all sorts of subcomponents. But the main vision hasn't been updated in now 19 years. And that's getting really long in the tooth. It was supposed to be I think a 30-year plan. But yeah, so at the high level plan, that's what sets the high level policies for growth and development in the county, and that really needed to be looked at. So after it's taken a little bit of time, but the county has started this effort called Advanced Knox to really build a new plan, and that's going to cover just the unincorporated area of Knox County. The plan will address things like development policies, where we should grow, what we should try and preserve, how we should grow. Are we looking at mixed use? What are the values that we have as Knox County, and try and pull all that into the plan. So Advanced Knox started. Its planning staff and county staff are they're the steering committee that are doing a great job of setting everything up. They brought in several outside consulting firms that are doing a lot of the heavy lift work of gathering information, reviewing it, looking. One of the things that we are benefiting from is these outside consultants are looking at a lot of other communities and counties in the region, and I think nationally. So they've got a lot of experience and they can tell us some things of what is working well and not working well, which so that gets us some great outside input into this process. Today, Advanced Knox they've completed their first round of public engagement. That was a listening round. So I believe the consultants at this point have, they've reviewed all the plans, all the zoning ordinances, all the regulations around land use, and they came up with some really great workshops back in March and April, asking communities and citizens to come in and tell them what makes Knox County special. What are some opportunities for development and growth? What do you think are not being met in terms of needs? What are some opportunities around transportation? All sorts of really good questions. So I believe at this point they're now taking all of that, consolidating it, mapping it out to they had maps of these workshops, which were great. And you would pinpoint, this is an area that I think, is special to Knox County. This is a park, or this, river area or something like that. So they're putting all that on a map, which is just going to be so helpful. The next round, and there's 3 rounds of kind of public involvement. The second round, which we'll be entering later this summer, I believe, is the making choices round. They're going to present several scenarios based off of all the feedback that they've got, and kind of show, I hope graphically or visually, what those scenarios look like. So as an example, they may say, well, here's what Knox County would look like in 10, 15, 20 years if we continued with your current zoning ordinances and plans and stuff like that. And maybe they'll show us how, what it looks like on a map and density. I'm hoping they'll address things like what transportation and congestion issues there might be. And I think, so they're going to give us several scenarios, and I believe during that round they'll ask the public to say, well, what of these scenarios kind of looks right? And then the final round is what they call confirming choices, which I believe is they're going to flesh out the final scenario a lot deeper and ask us, well, is this what you're looking for? Have we got this right? I think that's really the detailed comments feedback round. So I believe the process is 18 to 24 months. A big part of Advanced Knox is its land use planning and a transportation plan, which that's something that we haven't really had in the county for a long time, a comprehensive transportation plan as well. So they'll look at all the infrastructure, all the roads and sidewalks, bicycle lanes, things like that, and try and put a list of here's where your needs are. And I'm hoping there's estimated cost in there so we can get a good idea of what infrastructure is urgently needed now and in the next 10, 15 years based off anticipated growth. And the final sidecar is they've also slotted in putting a new or an updated parks and recreation plan together for the county. And that's really exciting because our parks, I think we've learned over the last 2 years, we like it a lot. We like being outdoors, and I think they're with the development, especially in the growth that we're seeing, the parks are more strained, and there's a need to probably create more parks because we simply have more people living in areas where people weren't living before.
And people can follow all of this, I think, at advancedknox.org, right? The website for the project, and there will be, announcements of upcoming meetings and so forth.
Yep, and they've, I believe, last time I went out on the website, they've collected all the responses and maps and everything from that first round, so you can go see all this comments and feedback. It's great.
Kevin, why doesn't the Advanced Knox include the city of Knoxville? You said it's only an unincorporated Knox County. Why not? Because they're so interdependent on one another, and especially with transportation, one of the issues that comes up in the city, which I cover city government, is trying to make it so that people can who live in the city but work in the county where jobs may be, getting to and from those places. Why wasn't the city included in that?
Yep. Great question. First of all, both the city of Knoxville and the town of Farragut are, I believe they're in a key stakeholder role as well. in the county process. I know that county staff I've talked to, they are engaging very directly with the city and Farragut on especially the transportation issues, because that's where most of the interface is between things. The city about 3 to 5 years ago, they went through a process of updating their zoning ordinance. That was the Recode Knoxville project, and we've got two levels of land use regulations. The first one is the top level is the plans, which are the development policies, the vision, kind of the need statements. The zoning ordinance is the actual laws and prescriptive regulations that you have to follow that regulate the uses that can occur on a piece of property, the setbacks, how far things have to be from lot lines, form, shape, all sorts of stuff. The city kind of said several years ago that in terms of the land use plan, it was good enough, and the city is generally developed out within the city limits. Not completely, but generally developed out. And most of what the city is actually doing is redevelopment. So it's either updating, making things bigger, changing shape. Maybe it's a tear down redevelopment. So the city said what they really need to focus on was their zoning ordinance, that list of those prescriptive regulations. And they said that at the plan level, the plan was probably good enough, but their zoning ordinance, that's where they're having the most conflicts. Knox County has got all this undeveloped land, and it really needed to take a plan that was just comprehensive for the county in general. And so that's what, and the county does need to update the zoning ordinance, and Advanced Knox is at the end supposed to come up with some recommendations and strategies for updating the zoning ordinance. Then it's widely recognized that a zoning ordinance update is the follow-on project after the comprehensive plan is adopted. So we're looking forward to that zoning ordinance update as well. But the city had already updated the zoning ordinance, and I believe the consensus was that the city didn't need necessarily its own updated general plan, but the county was desperately in need of one.
Okay, and thanks again to Kevin Murphy. And again, you can find the full version of that conversation at all of your favorite podcast spots. So now we come to the reader question part of the podcast. Every Thursday, we post on our subscriber-only Facebook page inviting people to submit any questions or topics or issues they would like to hear about in the podcast. One question we had this week had to do with this ongoing speculation about whether County Commissioner Larson Jay is going to run for city mayor next year. The short answer to that is we don't know. We have certainly asked him. We will continue to ask him, but it's going to be up to Commissioner Jay to decide when he wants to make an announcement about running or not running for anything else. He's currently running for re-election to his county commission seat. So of course, if you ask him about it now, he says, I'm only focused on this election. However, part of the question was, well, what happens if he runs for mayor and then gets re-elected the year after having been elected to a county commission seat? We also have a potential situation coming up on city council where there's a member of city council, Janet Testerman, who's running for the state legislature. And if she wins that race in November, then that would have an effect on her service on city council. So it's just an opportunity for us to talk about what happens when we get vacancies on our local legislative bodies, and they're a little bit different. So we'll talk about county commission first. Theoretically, if a county commissioner leaves office for any reason, including because they've been elected city mayor, it is up to the rest of commission to fill that vacancy. And we've seen this happen in recent years. I think the most recent time it happened maybe was when Richie Beeler was appointed to complete Dave Wright's term after Dave Wright was elected to the state legislature. So what happens is county commission would basically advertise the position, say they're accepting applications for it, resumes and so forth, and it's essentially open to anybody who would be otherwise qualified for the office, which means they would have to live in the commission district. In Larson Jay's case, he's an at-large commissioner, so it would be any eligible person in Knox County could theoretically apply for that. And then on the county, so county commission would then essentially have a vote. They take all the applications, they invite people for a public interview process where everyone's given a few minutes to talk. And then county commission votes. They have a system for doing that, and they appoint somebody to commission. Now, in the county, on the county side, the timing of that matters. And so you do not automatically get to fill out the rest of that term. It depends on where they are in that term, because basically a county commission appoints somebody and they would serve until the next general election. So let's take the theoretical case of Larson J., who, let's say he gets reelected to his commission seat this year in 2022, and then got elected city mayor in 2023, took office next December as he would. He would have served less than half of his term, obviously. He would have only served 1 year of that term. And so then whoever got elected or got appointed by county commission to his seat would only serve until the next county general election, which would actually be 2024. And so that person would have just basically a year, less than a year really, before they would have to run for re-election. And then that election in 2024 would only be to fill the last 2 years of that term, and then that person would have to run again. There's a little bit different system in the city, right?
Yeah, well, that's the way it works in the mayor's office in the city, but council is a little bit different because they don't have that provision about the
next general election,
midterm election, whatever you want to call it. No, in the city, Janet Testerman, like Larson J., is an at-large council member. The process of filling the seats is very much the same. The city council has 30 days after a person leaves office for whatever reason to appoint a successor. They usually do the same thing. They don't have to, but they usually do the same thing that county commission has done. And they take resumes. People will lobby for their appointment typically, and some people make it a more public effort than others, almost like an election. But then city council votes. You need a supermajority of 6 to appoint a person. But then once that person's appointed, they serve the remainder of the term. Now, this also gets into term limits, which, again, here's the difference between the city and the county. In the city, a partial term counts as a term. The way the city's term limits ordinance is written is that if you, anytime in the previous 2 terms, consecutive terms, you serve more than 1 term, you are term limited. And so a partial term counts just as much as a full term.
One day more than a full term would
1 day.
count, right?
And for example, the most recent appointment to a city council seat was when Mayor Kincannon hired Stephanie Welch to be her deputy to the mayor. Stephanie Welch had been the 1st District representative. That's South Knoxville and Fort Sanders. So she accepted that job, stepped down. Council appointed Tommy Smith to fill that seat. He filled the rest of her term, was reelected last year, and so this is his only full term. And so in 4 years, he will be, or 3 years now, he will not be able to run for re-election.
Right, so he will get a total of about 6 years.
He'll get about 6 years
rather than the 8 years.
Yeah.
And on the county side, only a full term counts toward term limits.
Right.
And so, for example, I mentioned Richie Beeler, who's currently the commission chair. He had about 2 years of service on commission after he was appointed, and then was reelected to a full term. And when this term expires, he will still be eligible to run for another full term, because only full terms of service count toward county commission's term limits. Mm-hmm. So you can theoretically have about 11 years and 300 and some days of service on county commission and still, only have served 2 terms as far as term limits go. So that is our answer to reader question this week, watch, if you are a Compass subscriber, watch our Compass Colloquy subscriber Facebook page next Thursday for an invitation to submit questions next week. Okay, so looking ahead to this coming week, first of all, it is a shortened week because everybody is off on Monday for Memorial Day. All offices, all government offices are closed. We do have a couple of things on the horizon. City Council is meeting on Tuesday, right?
Yes, City Council is meeting on Tuesday. It's kind of funny after the last meeting where they passed the budget and passed a tax increase. It's almost like they're hungover. There's not a whole lot on the agenda that's of grave import. In fact, there are a lot of zoning issues on the agenda, a lot more than usual. But there is one, and one of those zoning issues is Knoxville College's effort to have some property rezoned so they can build a housing complex there to generate revenues to help get that college back on its feet. And so that I imagine that will be passed without much ado. But there is one interesting item on the agenda. The East Tennessee Foundation will be donating $40,000 to the city to do a study of the culture within the Knoxville Police Department. Now, over the past couple of years, there have been a lot of incidents that have raised questions about KPD culture. Especially internally with their African American officers and some sexually suggestive things that get said and done, kind of
allegations of retaliation.
Yeah,
whistleblowers,
all kinds of things like that. It's been kind of a mess. And what they are going to do is take this $40,000 grant and get a study done to look at the culture, which is probably a good time to do this because we have a new police chief coming in, and this chief is going to be able to rely on that study as well as getting to know the people in the department and everything else to find out where the weaknesses and deficiencies are in the culture and what they can do to improve them.
Well, and it's interesting because both Mayor Kincannon and former police chief Eve Thomas, as each of these prior incidents was kind of brought to light, there's always been this insistence that it's kind of like the few bad apples argument.
Right.
Like, yes, we may have problems with this officer or that officer, we're dealing with it, but there's not a culture problem. That's been sort of like a mantra. We don't think there's a culture problem. I think the whole issue around the culture of law enforcement and police departments has obviously been under the microscope nationally, certainly since all of the protests of the past couple of years. But also, it's been brought to light in some ways this past week with, of course, the horrible massacre of students at elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, followed by a lot of questions about the police response to that. Mm-hmm. And that gets into police culture questions, too, about sort of, who are the police there to protect? And of course, the police will say they're there to protect everybody, all of us, and I'm certainly not saying that they're not and that they don't do things to protect people, but a lot of the concerns that have arisen there is that it seemed like the police response was driven primarily by protecting themselves from the shooter, which of course is not what they're supposed to be doing in that situation. They're supposed to be protecting everybody else. And so I think that this question of police culture is sort of a very ripe one for examination, both locally and at the national level. It'll be interesting to see what comes from that.
Yeah, it certainly is. And one of the things is Paul Noel, the incoming police chief, has built a reputation as being a reformer, especially of the culture of the New Orleans Police Department where he's coming from. So, he's going to come in. He's already talked about some of the changes that or I shouldn't say change, some of the training that he anticipates doing to make officers more accountable for their actions, more transparent about what they do, and cut down on some of the things that lead to these accusations of cultural deficiencies. And this study is good because you mentioned the bad apples. That's one theory is there are a few bad apples. The other is the orchard is pretty bad. Mm-hmm. We need to look at this study's going to look at the orchard.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the study says, and then of course what if anything comes out of it. One other thing that I wanted to mention, as everybody is hopefully enjoying their nice long Memorial Day weekend, we do have, and this is not coming up in the next week, but in a couple of months, we do have yet another set of local elections. On August 4th, we are going to have the Knox County general elections and the primary elections for state and federal offices. And we did run this past week, and you can find it on our website, sort of an election crib sheet, just to kind of remind people, that we do have another election coming up, which would be sort of easy to forget, I think, over the months of June and July, and that we do have actually a good number of competitive races on that ballot. In both, mostly we have about 14 contested county races for offices ranging from county mayor to commission, school board, and trustee. A lot of those have a Democratic challenger and a Republican candidate, often a Republican incumbent in many cases. Some of them, like the school board races, 3 of the school board races have independent candidates running. And then there are 2 contested state legislative primaries. Senator Richard Briggs has a Republican primary challenger. And of course, there's in State House District 18, City Councilwoman Janet Testerman, who we just mentioned, is running, and she has a Republican primary challenge from Elaine Davis. So we have kind of a rundown of what all those races are, who's running, and we also took a look at kind of where everybody's financial standings were versus their opponents. And maybe not surprisingly, most of the Republican candidates are much better funded than most of the Democratic candidates.
And many of those are incumbents. So incumbents are always better funded, or almost always better funded. And in Knox County, where Republicans tend to win countywide races, they tend to be better funded as well.
Yep. So if you're looking for something to dive into, something substantive to dive into during your holiday weekend, I don't actually know why you would be, but just in case you are, you can go and take a look at that on our website, the rundown of the elections. Of course, we will have individual coverage of each of those contested races as we get closer to the election. And I think that will wrap us up for this week.
I think so.
All right. Well, we hope everybody has a good and safe Memorial Day weekend.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.